Um, it's always a challenge to talk in the afternoon because people have a nice lunch and dozing off. So I thought I'll walk around a bit, get everybody energized, and talk about things and talk about sustaining change. Change is in the air. We love change. We talk about change, and we always want to try and figure out how do we survive in this change. The idea of doing this talk came when I was sitting in this conference last year. And I was listening to these bright consultants. Charles was there. All these consultants talk about how they can improve the processes, how they can bring our efficiencies up, improve our quality, do all those things. And when we are discussing with amongst our garment exporter friends and said, great, looks good, pata nahi mere yahan chala nahi yaar. Things didn't work out. I don't know why it didn't work out. Things didn't work out. So I started thinking, I said, I've gone to over 100 companies. We implemented ERP system. That's what we do when we come in. We're the most notorious gang of people. Walk into companies, push things around, and say, change. So I told Mr. Kesar, I said, Mr. Kesar, I want to talk. And I want to talk about sustaining change and how do we sustain change in organizations, because yes, we have consultants coming in and telling us how to improve quality, how to improve productivity. But what happens, they take their money and then 6 months later we come back and we have the same problem, lab dip is not matching, same problem, color variation, same problem, buyer says, your quality is bad, your DHU is whatever, 165%, that can't be actually. So those kinds of problems keep coming out and we keep coming back to the, you know what, I spent this money, I didn't really get that benefit. So I told Mr. Kesar, I said, I want to talk about it because not that I know a lot, I'm not a management guru. What I'm going to talk about is what I've seen, and I've seen in companies which have worked well, and companies which have not been able to sustain change. So that's what I'm going to talk about. That's the focus. So the first premise my talk has is that you're ready, that you've decided to change. You've said, I'm going to change something. So I'm not going to talk about why to change, all that. I'm just saying you've thought about changing and how do we ensure when we go about changing that it is sustainable. So the environment is fast changing, global competition, reducing margins. The speakers before me have talked a lot about it. So I'll not talk too much about it, but I'll first say, so when I talk about organizations, I wanted to categorize them in 4 categories. First is right at the bottom, so I'll talk about the axis. So there's willingness to change. So if you're there, you're not willing to change. If you're there, you're always willing to change. If you're up there, how sustainable the change is. So if you're at the bottom there, you change, you're happy, or you don't, 6 months later, you're doing the same thing that you were doing before. And if you're at the top, you change and you're sustainable. So I've looked at companies, I've done implementations, and I've seen all sorts of companies. The one on the bottom left hand is the stagnant one. You all know they don't want to change everything. They've been there, done that. Very susceptible. They're like, very skeptical. We don't want, productivity improvement nahi hoti. Management information system nahi chalte. Finally it starts people who've been this for donkeys of years. They are the ones who work. You know what? We've been successful doing what we've been doing, and we'd rather stick with what we know. So that's the stagnant organization. These are names given by me, no management names. These are all names that I've came up with. So if you don't like it, then tough luck. Then there's the plastic organization. The plastic organization is like a plastic. You bend it, difficult to bend. Once it's bent, it stays bent. The plastic organization has got a characteristic. They've got a very strong culture. They have a strong culture. They go with things. And when they change, first of all, there's a lot of resistance. No. And that's good actually. You should resist change because you want to make sure that whatever you do is actually going to get you to the next level. But this organization is very skeptical about it, but once it decides, it does stay bent like a plastic, doesn't come back. That means it actually has changed. Third is the elastic organization. Like the same, elastic, you stretch it, leave it, comes back. Elastic organization characterizes people that when the owner of the company comes in, walks in, everybody's like, yes sir, you've got a great idea. Yes, we will do it. Great, fantastic. Yes sir, let's go in for the Lean Six Sigma project. Let's go in for a quality improvement project. Let's go in for whatever, X, Y, Z. And they start off, they are off the blocks running, and 1 month later, they're out there in the lead, but you come back after a year and say, what happened? You know what, it didn't work out. The organization went back to to where it was. Then there is the agile organization, which is where I say is the holy grail of an organization is it's got a strong culture, but it's agile. It wants to change, but when it changes, it stays changed. And again, as I said, the focus of my talk is change, is sustaining change. I'm not going to talk about the merits or demerits of what is it that you're trying to change next time. So we build an organization which accepts change. And it's difficult to build an organization which accepts change because first of all, you need to make sure you build an organization which believes that you have the capability to change. The organization needs to believe, your team needs to believe that if my leader, my boss is saying, I am going to go to this level here, you should truly believe, yes, we've done it in the past, we're going to do it. So you build an organization, and so what I'm going to talk about is a quick 5-minute steps of how to build an organization. So I'll go into my basic principle, measurement. The basic fundamental principle is measure. Numbers are boring for some people. I love them. Numbers have a great quality that tell you the truth, provided you collect it correctly. Sometimes they're ugly to look at. But measure. And a lot of times I've seen organizations who go in for systems, even my software, even my technology solution, without figuring out what is it that they're trying to do. An information system or anything is actually a measurement system. So first of all, you need to measure. Let's go slow. Don't click. I'll ask you and then click. Measure correctly. And I have got great examples of wrong measurements. I went to an organization once and I went to their cutting room and they said, oh, our cutting room is great. Our fabric utilization is fantastic. I said, okay, let's go and check it. And, there was a fundamental flaw. Because the person who was reporting how efficiently he was cutting was the one who was consuming the fabric. That's a fundamental measurement flaw. So, when you measure correctly, and there are umpteen ways to ensure that. So, think a lot about how you're asking to measure and how you're making measurements. Second example is, you go to a production manager and say, how many pieces are you producing in a day? The data which is coming in, who's supplying the data, who's generating the data, and who's supplying the, so what is the incentive or disincentive for somebody to massage the numbers? Third, don't shoot the messenger. And this is something which I've seen a number of times, and I'll club it with my second point, don't react to data. That, like, if we are not reacting to data, what the hell are we doing? Why are we collecting it? Right? The problem I've seen in organizations is, let's say, I'll give an example. We start measuring our production efficiency. Okay. So, I put in this system, I know my efficiency, and boom, the next day, efficiency is, first day is 42%. I'm like, what 42%? What the hell? This needs to be 55. The whole world is at 65. We are at 55. You know what? You said that the first day, forget about that change. Throw it out of the window. It's not going to happen. Because if the first reaction when somebody starts collecting data is for you to say, what the hell are we doing? Guess what? What's going to happen the next day? The person is going to make sure it's 55 and he's going to feed you the number which will ensure that you're going to react. So, I always talk about reaction, the 8-week rule. This is my rule. No management guru will tell you, this is my rule. Is that from the time you start collecting data to the time you first react to it, give 8 weeks. Because most human beings, we think only 6 weeks out. Beyond that, we really don't think. And you might not agree with it, but that's a basic scientific principle. Most people. So it is important that from the point you react to data and the time you start collecting it, give an 8-week gap so that you have ensured that data collection was accurate. You have ensured that the next time you ask data to be collected, people are not correlating with, oh my God, he's going to shout at me the next day. Very important, and I've seen organizations go a number of times. I have to literally hold back owners and say, guys, We were at 40. Don't worry about it. Just have him leave that report on your table. Don't even react. Don't even call him and ask him. And after 8 weeks, 9 weeks, sit and say, you know what, I've been looking at this. Can we do something about it? What it does is ensure that when your data collection starts, it starts and it takes 6 weeks to form a habit. That is well documented. You've ensured your data collection was accurate and you're actually working the right numbers. Okay, now this is the counterpoint. Data is relevant when it is correct. So I talked about don't react to data, 8 weeks, blah, blah, blah. But data is relevant when it's current. That's another fundamental principle. The more current the data, the better it is. Obviously, let's say my cut to ship ratio was 92%. If that was last year's data, it makes sense, but really, I really can't do too much about it. If my cut to ship ratio number coming out is for last month saying it was 92%, yes. Probably the people I can talk to and say, guys, what's going on? Can we improve it? But if I know today what's going on, I can definitely go and talk to the person and say, this is what's happening. And again, as I said, when I talk about the 8-week rule, it's from the time you started collecting it. I'm not saying you have to react every time 8 weeks later to that news. From the time, because it's important to collect trial data. So I just want to make sure that distinction is there. Okay, all right. So don't click. Okay, it's a question. It's a question. So obviously we can't ignore the human element, right? Right? So what are our most important? What is an organization's most important asset? What is? I get one number. People. Absolutely. Click. People are our most important assets. Click. Wrong. You guys are wrong. People are not the most important assets of an organization. And any organization which believes that really is in trouble. We want to tell our people that you're most important, but really they are not. We like to believe we are very important, but we really are not, because the graveyard is full of people who are very important. Right? You got it, sir? Next slide. Processes are the most important asset of an organization. And take it as a rule of thumb. If any training you do in the organization, if anything that you do doesn't affect your process, if any consultant comes to you and says, this is how I'm going to fix your process. If somebody tells me, I'm going to train your merchandisers. If it doesn't fix my process, I don't want my merchants to be trained. I don't want them. Because what? Merchants going to come, get trained, and when the person leaves, my money goes. So, processes are important. And don't spend a single paisa, penny, cent, whatever currency you're dealing with, on training people alone. It has to be in conjunction with processes. Keep that as a golden rule. Well, if you want to follow me, but this is the principles, okay? So processes are important. Now, great, I've talked about, go slow on the clicking, okay? I'll tell you when you click. Okay. So processes are wonderful. I've talked about processes are important. Now we know that processes are so important. But how do we fix processes? And that's a big problem we as a business owner, as a garment exporter, garment manufacturer, process to hame pata hai important hai. But how do we ensure the processes improve? First, next slide. And that's where I've seen organizations go wrong. They make a job description very complex. They make a job very complex. I have Amit here, I've known Amit, I actually met him 9 years back. We were talking about ERP. And Technopack is way up there in the league in terms of improvement system. What I'm telling you is more like, desi management system. Things which I've learned on the floor, going through life. Break a process into small steps. Advantage, and I'll give you one quick example of breaking something into small steps. Purchase is a process. Okay? So I get a purchase manager, pay him a lot of money, and so you purchase. How he purchases, I don't know. What he purchases, I know, but how he does it, but he gives me results. Now that's a very dangerous situation. Because when that purchase manager leaves, how do I replicate what the person was doing. If I have not broken down my purchase process into small activities, my ability to recreate and replace and keep it sustained is that much affected. My thumb rule for any process is that if it takes more than 3 days to train somebody, it's going to be always a challenge. So I'm going to talk about how, and there are processes which, activities which require more than 3 days, and I'll talk a little bit more about it. Actually, I'll talk right now about it. Separate the simple from the complex. So going back to the purchase example, what does purchase involve? Purchase involves knowing what is to be purchased. So what was my requirement? Second was building, getting vendors, getting quotations, deciding on quality, giving purchase orders, receiving the goods, making sure the goods were in quantity and quality, which was what was required, and finally making sure they're kept in the store properly, right? So these 6, 7 activities or 10 activities, let's break it down. Let's segregate the simple from the complex. What is a simple task? It's very simple for me to know what is needed to be ordered. Very simple. My requirement is there. I can create what I need to order. Then the next step, negotiation. Yeah, that's difficult. That probably is a complex stuff, but you can, simplify it. You have nominated vendors, prices are set. Even if you do not have nominated vendors, you can actually go and say, you know what, I'm going to have one of my managers who does complex work and have him spend actual time, negotiate with my vendor and say these prices are valid for the next 6 months. You can do it, you might not be able to do it. So the whole idea is you break it down, separate out the simple from the complex, make the lower level people and simpler people do the simple tasks and leave only the complex tasks to the high level people, only the complex tasks. So that means a very highly trained person or who takes 10 years, that's a merchandising manager. Don't let the merchandising manager fill in Excel sheets and those things. Don't do that. And the more you're able to break down tasks into simple tasks, simple activities, the better you will get at sustaining. You will be able to replace people quickly, you will be able to train people up quickly, and you will be able to ensure that people who are being paid a lot of money are not doing job of a person who are actually don't need to be paid that much money. Alright, next slide. Always don't forget what's in it for me. How much time do I have? Sir, I'm good on time? Yes. I can another 10 minutes, okay, plenty of time then. What's in it for me? Okay. And I'll give you a couple of examples on what it's for me, and one example is from my own son, my younger son. And if I ask him, I said, why don't you get me a glass of water? वो बोला मेरे मुझको क्या मिलेगा? He's 4-year-old, well he was 4, now he's 7. But as a 4-year-old, he understood this concept, मुझको क्या मिलेगा? Okay, and that's a fundamental. Sorry, we didn't understand. You didn't understand? What will I get? Got it? Sorry, I went into Hindi, but some things are always expressed right in language, right? So, and then I asked him, I said, why don't you study? He said, same question. What will I get? And I said, if you study hard, when you grow up like me, you'll be well-to-do, you'll have money, you'll have cars, you want to buy a nice BMW, it's always been your dream, which I've denied you. And he said, like, that's great. But mujhko abhi kya milega? What will I get now? That's the second principle. People want to know what affects them now. And it's important that when you go about doing sustaining change in an organization, the first and foremost thing you need to keep in mind is that when you're talking to people, and I'll give you another example. I said, a consultant comes in, and I am the head of the company. I said, guys, I'm paying this guy a lot of money to bring in, and he's going to make this change, and he's going to improve the organization. Guess what your employee is hearing? He's hearing that I'm paying this guy a lot of money. That means I have a lot of money. And that is why when I told you last month that the situation is very tight, I was really lying. Okay, that's what he's hearing. That's not what he's saying, but that's what he's hearing. And that, if he gave me some of that money, gosh, I could do so much better than what this consultant is doing. Right? Correct? That's what he's hearing. So in any case, the consultant is screwed. Because he's taking away the money which was in that employee's mind meant for him. It's being taken from his pocket. So, don't ever do that. Don't ever do that. Don't tell people that, hey, we have to make this success because we have put in a lot of money. Because that's what I just told you is what the other person is listening. So don't do that. Okay. So what's in it for me? So you have to sell the change. And again, I talk about the 8-week rule. If you have to, before you go about even talking about this in the organization, think about it and say, I need to make sure that within 8 weeks, I should be able to tell them something positive which is going to happen to them on the 8th week. Think about it. If you can't find an answer for 8 weeks, don't do that change. Or there's another method. If the benefit is going to come after 6 months, 6 months times 6 months, 26 weeks, break it into 3 or 4 milestones. But make sure on the 8th week you have something positive for that group of people. Not always money, but money is a great motivator. But something positive. So, because again, I think why 8 weeks is because psychologically I think we always live by the next pay date. So probably 8 weeks mein ek pay date to aa jayega. So I think psychologically we live like that. But it's important that people need to see what's in it for me, mere ko kya milega. And it doesn't have to be always. One of the ways you show, you can actually, and I'll talk for the next slide, one of the ways you show that is if you actually take interest in it and the employee knows that yes, he's checking on it, that means if I am perceived to be with it, my interaction with the boss increases, my importance with the boss increases. So there are various ways in which you can do non-monetary benefits. All right, next one. I'm coming to the end of my presentation. So create a review cycle. And this I didn't learn from myself. I actually, my brother-in-law is a bit smart chap. I asked him, why don't you join my organization? He's a GE, Black Belt, Sigma, Six Sigma. And one of the things he put in, and he said, how often do you review with the people? And I said, yeah, I review with them every day. I mean, I talk to them, I check with them what they're doing. He said, but have you like made a calendar? How often you meet them? I said, no, nothing. Make it. I did it. And doing it for 3.5 years now. Pretty much, I think, what we did was first Monday of every week, we do the weekly managers meeting. We sit, talk about things. A lot of times we have nothing to talk about. We talk about our children, we talk about what's happening. But actually I realized it actually has had a huge benefit for the organization. And I'll tell you why it has. It has a couple of benefits. First, people want reliability. Human beings and every organism has a need that they need predictability. A lot of people are employees because they want that salary at the end of the month. They can't live with a lot of uncertainty. So when you build that cycle, say every Saturday I will sit with you for 10 minutes and I'm going to ask you these 6 questions, 6 topics. What it does is it actually focuses the team and saying, every Saturday I'm going to sit for 10 minutes. Because the benefit is, if you, let's say you're walking and you're in the office and one of your employees is walking around and you're like, hey, come in, I want to talk to you. That is a scary situation because this guy is like, what the hell is going to talk to me tomorrow? What has happened? He is always wondering, he's now started wondering what has happened. Kahin phone to nahi aa gaya kisi bahar ka? Koi quality problem to nahi aa gaya? So he's thinking all those thoughts. And then you walk in and say, acha, tell me what's happening. So he's like, okay. And he is not prepared. He doesn't have the answer. Because we've actually surprised him. We've ambushed him actually, literally. So, build the cycle. Let people prepare for a meeting. It does the second benefit. They know they have to meet you on a certain date. They know they have committed for the last meeting certain things. They will actually make some effort to do those things because they have to answer you on that day. Third, the benefit that every meeting you have, if most of your meetings happen when some crisis has happened, your subordinate really doesn't like your face because you represent a problem. Because every time you meet him, you're actually calling him for a problem. So if you meet them on a regular cycle, every time there's not a problem, and even if you're meeting when there is no problem, you actually take out some of the fear factor and actually open up conversation within your organization. So create a review cycle, and lastly, it actually imposes some discipline on yourself. That's hard to do. Making sure every Saturday or every that next day you sit and talk. That you have no other personal commitments on that day. You structure your time around it, but make sure you do that. If nothing else you do, learn from this, whatever I've talked about today. If you just follow the review cycle, it will make a big, trust me, I've seen companies do it, makes a big. And finally, I'll come talk. Finish? I'll finish 30 seconds, sir. I know I talk a bit, but that's fine. Akshay already warned me, keep it short. And he gave me a few words about it. I was only to check if he's still carrying tomatoes in his. Okay. Finally, I'll come down to the great management guru of our times. Right? And that's Ranbir Kapoor. Keep it simple, silly. And it is actually boils down to that. Keep it simple. I'll summarize. First, measure. Second, break down processes into simple tasks. Always keep thinking about that. How do I take any task and break? And you know what, trust me, if you put your brains on it, you will actually be able to break down tasks, jobs into simple tasks. Have that review cycle. And never ever forget about what's in it for me. Okay? If you can follow in one of these, I'm sure it'll go down a long way in terms of